Hello and welcome back to another Extreme Book Club video. Today we have a pretty fun book to cover. This book, funnily enough, I don't even remember ordering, but I had it somehow and I liked it enough to make a video on it, so it worked out. The book itself feels like a mix of The Wasp Factory and The Troop, two books we've covered previously on this channel and two of the better books we've covered in my opinion. By that, I mean this book has pretty good writing, in addition to some extreme themes and splatterpunky vibes to it. The book we are covering today is called Wormwood, by Chad Lutzke and Tim Meyer. This is not the other Wormwood by G.P. Taylor. This is a little more intense than that one. It is very much a coming-of-age story, but it also has a ton of grotesque and extreme themes in it. And you might find it slow at first, but the last act of the book gets so wild that I'm not sure we've covered something quite as heavy as it. But if you don't know how we do things on this channel, let me break it down for you. We start out with an intro, which you are listening to now, where we discuss the author and a little bit about the book. Then we get into the summary, which is the bulk of the video, and we do just that in it, summarize the book. Then finally we get into the analysis, where we analyze the themes or messages of the book. But before we get into it, thank you so much for watching. We are so close to 100k subs, and I cannot wait to show you guys what I have in store. Next week will be that remake video on mouthwashing, a game video that I really messed up a couple years ago, and I want to set the record straight and remake that video in the coming week, so look out for it. And as an added treat, here's my new cat Panic, interrupting me when I was reading this book from this video. But without getting any further into the intro, let's get into the actual book. Before we start though, you will notice that every chapter in the first two acts of the book has a title that will say an amount of days before something happens. So I will mention how many days are left whenever that is applicable. 122 days left. Baker Gray felt a tap on the back of his head while he sat in his school classroom. The entire class started laughing behind him. He didn't know what happened until his teacher, Mrs. Delgado, walked towards him and grabbed something from his hair. A paper airplane. Baker looked behind him at the 20 or so students laughing, even the nerd. The only one not laughing was a chubby brown-haired boy with freckles. He was the one who threw it, all right. "Who threw it?" Mrs. Delgado asks. All the students' faces turned towards the freckled boy. Baker didn't know the kid's name. He didn't know anyone's name here yet. "Mr. McCarthy!" Mrs. Delgado yelled out. "You threw it! It's written all over you!" The freckled boy looks at his arm sarcastically. "There's nothing written on me," he says with a shitty grin. She yells at him to go to the principal's office. He walks out with a smile until he locks eyes with Baker and gives him a death glare that gives him goosebumps. Great, Baker thinks. Only 3 days of the school and I already made an enemy. Baker then goes to the bathroom and washes his face with water. It felt weirdly great. He then stares at himself in the mirror. He doesn't like how he looks. His teeth are crooked and his forehead is too small, not to mention the moles on his face. There's a lot to hate in his mind. A stall door opens and a shadow emerges and speaks. "You're not that ugly, dude." Someone from the shadow laughs and emerges, but Baker doesn't know if it's friend or foe yet, so he doesn't move. "I'm just kidding, bro," through a breathy voice. "You're the new kid, right? Don't worry about Corny." Baker looks at the boy questioningly. "You know, the kid that threw the paper airplane? Cornelius McCarthy? He'll forget about you and go back to bullying nerds in a week. Just don't mention his freckles to him." Baker stares and says, "Noted." The boy says his name is Seb, but don't call him Sebastian or he'll kick Baker in the nuts. But then, before Baker could say anything else, Seb asks, "You like video games?" Baker did like video games, and a couple hours later he was skipping the bus to go play video games at Seb's house. He thought about calling his mom, but she didn't get off of work till 5 anyway. When they got there, he beat Seb several times over and over in a game that is implied to be Mortal Kombat. Seb swears and asks, "Does Baker ever lose?" And Baker laughs and says, "Yeah, sometimes. To the bots. On easy," with a smile. As he does, 3 girls walk in the room. Seb points to them and says, "Oh, that's his sister Trina." Seb says if Baker tries to bang her, he'll kick him in the nuts. Trina says, "Hi, Baker," rather quickly, and then says to Seb, "Sebastian, Mom told you to take out the trash. Now, or you'll be grounded," she said almost excitedly. Seb waves her away and she says that her and her 2 friends are going to the mall. Trina and one of her friends start to walk away, but then the other stays and looks at the screen. "Cassandra, you coming? Cass?" Cass says they should go without her, as she picks up one of the controllers. "Really, bitch? You want to stay with my brother and his ugly friend?" "Fucking weirdo," she says as her and her other friend walk away. Seb looks at this girl and says, "Who are you again?" Cass says, "I'm the one that was using your sister and her friend as my personal Uber." She then asks if Baker is good at this game, and Baker says, yeah. They play a couple of rounds, and then she beats him every single time. All Baker can say is, huh. 106 days left. For the past few weeks, the three have been inseparable, spending most days hanging out at Seb's house. Pizza, video games, and horror movies. Today they are in the Bodenark woods outside their little town of Long Lake, Georgia. Seb and Baker sat in the woods as Cass came in and threw a plastic science bag with a pig fetus down on the log in front of them. She takes out a scalpel and cuts the baggie open. "You think anyone will notice?" Baker asks. Cass says, "No. Well, if they do, we won't get in trouble or anything, probably." She says, "Baker, you worry too much." She then says, "Let me guess, Baker. Your parents keep you in the house as much as possible, so you like to get out as much as possible. You read a lot, comic books and novels, and things above your reading level. You like to play fighting games, even though you suck." Although she nailed it, Baker wanted to keep her guessing and just says, "I don't have a dad." But she says, well, she got everything else right? She offers him to take a step forward towards the pig and promises he'll like it. He does so, and she gives him the scalpel. It feels heavy in his hand. She puts her hand on his and guides him towards the pig as they make an incision on its belly. The smell of formaldehyde comes out and Baker can't keep it in anymore. He turns and vomits. "Yikes, didn't see that coming," Cass says. Seb shrugs next to them both. "You lightweight," Cass says. Baker thinks he can't help it. He signed up for friendship in video games, not cutting open dead things. He just wants to be friends. A small voice in his head asks, "Do you want to be just friends with Cass?" He then focuses on her chest. He can't help it. "What are you staring at, new kid?" she asks as she puffs a cigarette. He says nothing, and she tells him, "Go over there." He does so, and then she puts her hand around his shoulder and brings him closer to the corpse of the pig fetus. Seb watches from behind. She pulls out an intestine of the pig and unravels it until it's longer than the pig itself. She peels it away from the yellow, fatty tissue and gross liquid. She holds it out and tells Baker, "Eat it." He looks horrified, but then she laughs. She says she's just fucking with him. She'll cook it first, or he'll get trichinosis. He feels like this is the beginning of something very wrong. "This is better than science class, right?" She laughs. 104 days left. Alyssa Clement stares out of her window on the other side of the cul-de-sac of the abandoned house, an unsightly blot on the neighborhood. That house will never sell. She kisses the cheek of her husband, Gerald, and goes back to looking at the abandoned house, thinking how vacant it is. Just like her, she thinks. She looks back at her husband and says she wants to try again. 99 days left. Baker sits down at the lunch table next to Seb. He looks at the greasy cheesesteak that he's eating. The grease reminds him of the liquid coming out of the pig the other night. He then thinks of Cass's breasts. Seb asks, "What are you thinking about?" And Baker lies and says, "The pig we dissected." Seb then asks if Baker wants to talk about it, and he just says, "No." Seb says it's just science. They'll be dissecting them in class next year anyway. He then asks, "What do you think about Cass?" Baker asks, "What is he talking about?" Seb then says, "Don't you think she's hot?" Baker says he guesses, but then Seb asks, "Do you find it weird that a girl that hot, who is 3 years older than us, being 16, is hanging out with losers like us?" Baker says no, he doesn't think it's weird, but he hasn't really thought about it much either. He says that the only thing he finds weird about her is that one day they're playing fighting games, and the next day they're dissecting a pig in the woods. And now she wants to take him to that abandoned house she was talking about earlier, on Wormwood Circle. It seems reckless. Seb then chortles at that. I love that word, by the way, chortles. He then says, "We're all just being kids. Getting up to a little trouble is what kids do." As he says this, a shadow looms over them. Baker thought it was corny again, but it was the school guidance counselor, Alyssa Clement. Her graying blonde hair and a ponytail on her shoulder. "Baker Gray?" she asks. Baker says, "Yes, am I in trouble?" She laughs and says, "Should you be? I just want to talk to you. It'll take just a moment." He follows her into her office and they sit down. She asks how is he liking the school so far, and if he's made any friends. Baker says, yeah, he's made a few friends. And she says, that's good, but it's important to make the right friends. He asks, are you talking about Seb? She says, Sebastian Fairfield? No, not at all. He seems like a good kid. Baker then asks, why are you doing this then? She says, Well, Baker's mother asked her to keep an eye on him. But maybe it's a good idea for Baker to hang around kids his own age. This clues him into what she's talking about. Do you mean Cass? She clears her throat and bites her tongue. No, I didn't say that, but sure. Sebastian seems like a good kid. You two should hang out. Just you two, though. Baker then says, yeah, thanks for the advice. He then stands to go and then he stops. Did my mom really tell you to watch out for me? Mrs. Clement says, yeah, of course. She hopes he doesn't feel like she's prying. Baker leaves and then thinks he doesn't think that she's prying. He's happy to just actually have someone give a shit about him for once. 95 days left. Baker watched his mom put on lipstick in the mirror and he asks where's she going. She doesn't answer him for the first few times, but then she says, I'm going out with a friend. A guy friend. Baker says, nice. And then she says she knows it's hard. He then asks, how long before we move this time, huh? A year? 2? 10? His mom says she doesn't know. But that's life. Baker just considers ditching Seb and Cass. Being a loner is easier when you have to leave all the time. He's gonna have to move soon anyway, he figures. He probably won't live in Long Lake by next September even. He then asks, Mom, why do you even bother dating? Because we're just gonna have to move again anyway. Because of your job. You pick us up and move us all around the country all the time anyway. There's no point to dating. His mom says, because dates are fun. She then asks her son, how do I look? Baker says, yeah, nice. Then she says, you're so much fun, Baker. I'll be back. There's a frozen pizza in the freezer. She leaves and then he goes to play on his PlayStation and hope this empty feeling goes away. But it never does. Well, until later. He plays this game and thinks about how he's 14 now, almost in high school, when a knock comes at his door. The rules are not to open it when his mom's not home, but he does anyway. His 2 friends stand there. What are you guys doing here? He asks excitedly. Seb comes in and looks around, and Cass does the same and says, man, you got a nice place. They look at all the photos on his wall, not mentioning how he looks miserable in all of them. Baker asks, how did you know where I lived? And Cass says, oh, she has her ways. They tell him that they're here to pick him up for some fun. Baker says he can't leave the house. That's just the rules. The 2 other kids look at each other and they say, live a little, Baker. Cass gives him finger guns and then looks at the paused fighting game on the TV. She asks, are you practicing to beat me? He says, whatever, where are we going? Cass says she can't tell him, it's a secret. But it doesn't matter because of rules, right? Baker begs, but she says, no, he's just gonna have to stay here and wonder what could have been. Baker sighs and says, fine, I'll go. She opens her mouth and gasps and says, what a rebel. And then they head off. They get to the cul-de-sac and stand in front of the empty house. Baker asks, are we going in there? And Cass says, yep. Baker says he doesn't know about this. But he says he knows what's going to happen. She's going to bat her eyes and under the pale streetlight, he's going to cave. She eggs him on, saying no one even lives there. Her dad works in real estate and he calls it dead inventory. No one's going to be in the house. She then pulls out a flask and offers it to him. Baker asks, is that alcohol? And she says, well, it's not Kool-Aid. It's vodka. Baker knows that vodka is very alcoholic, but grabs the flask and takes a sip of it. It burns horribly on the way down, and then she pats him on the back and they walk towards the house. Seb says, the first sip always burns like hell, right? Don't worry. Baker then asks, you had some? Seb says, everyone our age has snuck alcohol before. Baker thinks it explains his low-key demeanor today, but then they walk to the house and Baker feels dizzy. Though even worse, he's never felt so hollow. 87 days left. Seb and Baker sat at the mall wondering, where's Cass? A bunch of girls got out of a van all dressed in club clothes. Baker finds it weird that other people their age can socialize so openly like that. Man, where's Cass? Seb texts on his phone to her. Where are you? All of a sudden, another group of boys show up, and they see who else but Corny is among them. Baker says they need to go in the mall, because Corny's right there. Seb says, Baker, you're overreacting, it's fine. Baker looks over again, and sure enough, Corny is staring lasers through him. Baker grabs Seb, and they both run into the mall. Seb asks, why'd you do that? And Baker then explains. But then Seb says, it's fine. We'll just wait for Cass in the food court. Fine. As they walk towards the food court, a voice rings out. Where you going, pussy boy? They turn around, and Corny is right there with them among his friend group of guys. What are you two butt buddies doing? Shouldn't you be home sucking each other off? Baker smiles and says, yeah, why? You jealous of that kind of thing? That pisses Corny off. Baker knows that one was clever and it got to him. You think you're funny, noob? What year does this take place? Who says noob anymore? I heard that in MW2 lobbies when I was like 10. Corny pushes Baker into Seb, and Seb catches Baker to break his fall. And red-hot needles went through Baker's mind. But before he knew it, he was swinging hard at Corny. It barely grazed his chin, and in response, Corny connected a hard hit to Baker's face. He could taste the blood as he fell to the ground. He was trying to block the wave of fists and kicks to his body on the ground, but then his vision goes out. Back at home, Baker's mom chastises him, saying, "Another fight? Really? Is this about the violent video games?" she asks, pointing at the PlayStation. Baker grabs a bag of ice and puts it on his leg and says, "She doesn't need to take his PlayStation away, please." He didn't start it anyway. She says, "You didn't? You threw the first punch." She then says, "Who's that kid you're always hanging out with? What's his name?" Baker says, "Who, Seb?" She says, "Yeah. I don't want you hanging out with him anymore. No more. You've been acting different since you started hanging out with him," pointing at his lip. Baker says he has not changed because of Seb. Or Cass, he thinks, but he would never tell his mom that he was friends with a 16-year-old girl. She would not approve of that. Baker asks, "Am I grounded?" But Lily Gray says no. But then asks him, "What could you have done different?" He ignores that question and he just is happy that he gets to see Cass again. He remembers her pulling the intestine out of the pig and smiling at him. He felt a tingle in his groin when she did that. Baker's mom asks again, "What are you thinking about?" He says, "Nothing." And then she asks the same question again. "What could you have done different?" Baker says, "I could have walked away." She says, "That's right. Don't make me regret not grounding you." He says, he's sorry. And his mom says, she knows. She hugs him and then says she feels like this is her fault, moving around so much. Baker then says, "I love you, Mom." Then his mom says, "How about this? No more moving. If you promise to not get into any more fights, I'll make sure I get no promotions or changing location." Tears well up in Baker's eyes and he says, "Really?" She says if he gets into no more fights, she'll promise. She then asks, "Are you going to be okay?" And Baker says he will. He'll be okay. He doesn't know why, but he felt like that was a lie. 85 days left. "That motherfucker," Cass says, looking at Baker's busted lip. Seb asks, "Do you want another soda?" But Cass smiles smugly and says, "Don't you got anything stronger?" She looks back at Baker and says, "Oh, she's so fucking pissed at that kid. If she was here, that never would have happened." She asks, "What's the kid's name?" And the boys say, "It's a kid named Cornelius McCarthy." She says, Good. Where's he live?" The boys look at each other and they say, they don't know, but why? She says, she wants to have a little fun with him. Baker says, that's not a good idea. She touches his face and his lip. The feeling was electric to Baker, and she says, "You're gonna let him win?" she asks. He says he promised his mom. She scoffs and says, "Your mom?" almost mockingly. Baker says, yeah, he promised her he wouldn't get in any more trouble, and she told him that if he did, they wouldn't have to move anymore. She says, oh, that is a good deal. Baker says he wants to stay here. He likes it here. Cass bites her lip and says, home, huh? She looked weird and then put a hand on Baker's thigh, and the feeling was strange to him. His testicles shriveled up. I like you here too, Bake. I want you both to stay here. Baker liked that. She called him Bake, not New Kid or Baker. She takes her hand off his thigh, and it takes him a while to feel normal again after that. 76 days left. Baker and Seb walk into the heart of the woods in the early November cold. What are we gonna do today? Seb says as he kicks a tree, hyped up on energy drinks. Baker thinks it's way too early for this shit. But Seb called him 2 hours ago and said Cass has a gift for them. So he figured he'd go. They walked deep into the woods where Cass said to go. Past a bloody tree where they cut their thumbs and labeled themselves a tribe. Boo! Cass jumps out and scares them. Baker tells her not to do that as he holds his heart. She gives them blindfolds and leads them deeper into the woods. Baker didn't want to, but she raised her brow when asking, which always made him fold. So he puts on the blindfold and she tells him, no peeking. She leads them deeper into the woods and says, okay, take him off. You're gonna love this. Baker takes off his blindfold and is horrified by what he sees. Cass, what have you done? In front of them, tied to a tree stump, was Cornelius McCarthy. His pants pulled down around his ankles, a rope in his mouth, and holes in his t-shirt from whatever Cass did. How Baker starts, but Cass cuts him off and says, "How did I get him here?" Easy. Boys like him are easy to trick. They only have one thing on their mind. I said I'd suck his dick and he followed me anywhere. I didn't, obviously, but here he is. She takes out a butterfly knife and points it at him. Baker looks horrified and Cass notices. "Aren't you happy? This is how we win, Bake." She looks to him and she says she just wants to have some fun. She takes the knife out and approaches him. Baker thinks that she's gonna gut him like a pig, but then she cuts his arms loose. She says he better not move or she'll stab him. He cries weakly. "Corny, right? That's what they call you?" He nods his head. Baker looks away and Cass says, "Are you gonna barf again, Bake?" Baker says, "No." And she says, "We have to toughen you up. We haven't even cut him open yet." At this, Cornelia starts flailing, but then she points the knife closer to his neck and says, "She's just kidding, relax." Seb says, "We're not?" Cass laughs and says, "Should we?" Seb says they should get revenge for what he did to Baker. Cass approaches Corny and says, "I heard you and your friends beat the shit out of my boyfriend." "Boyfriend?" Baker thinks. However, he doesn't want this. This is too much. But a part of him likes this. He thinks this is revenge. This is winning. Cass rips the tape off of Corny's mouth and asks, "Why did you and your friends beat up my boyfriend?" He looks around and says, he doesn't know. Seb runs up to him with his fists cocked and says, "Liar!" Cass looks at him and says, "Easy, Tiger. Easy. All on good time." Cass tells Corny to try again. Corny looks at Baker and says, "I don't know. I guess because he was an easy target," he says as if it was a question. She asks him to explain. Corny says, "Baker has no friends, and I don't like his face." Now angry. Cass says, that's fine. But now, we have to give you a punishment." Cass looks evilly at him and says, "Have you ever heard of public humiliation, Corny? Have you ever touched yourself, Corny?" Corny looks around. He says nothing. Cass says, jerked off, jacked off, fed the geese, choked the snake. He begs, but Cass says, "For fuck's sake." She goes over and cuts his underwear off and takes his manhood in her fingers and puts a knife to it. "Do it, or I'll cut it off." Corny cries, and Baker thinks this is too far. But at the same time, he thinks Corny probably won't ever fuck with him again. "And action," Cass says, stepping away. I obviously can't describe this scene, but he tries and really can't do anything. Cass looks at Seb and Baker after a good 10 minutes and just says, "Okay, this isn't working. Should we just let him go? Has he suffered enough?" Both of the boys say, "Yeah," nervously. She cuts Corny loose and tells him, "If you ever tell anyone what happened here this morning, I'll slit your fucking throat with your family." He cries and runs away. Seb asks, "You just gonna let him run?" And Cass says, "Yeah, he's a good little piggy now. And good little piggies don't squeal." Now let's get some food. Doing God's work makes me hungry. 70 days remain. In the movie theater, Baker, Seb, and Cass walk down the white hallway. "Quick, before someone sees," the usher says to Cass and hurries them along. "Thanks, Merle," she says, rubbing her hand down his uniform. He licks his lips during this and closes his eyes. The R-rated action movie muffled from the room over. Merle pushes Baker and Seb through the employees-only door and grabs Cass. "You promised," he says to her. Cass says, "But the movie's starting." But he licks his lips again, and Baker feels like his eyes are almost glowing like a predatory yellow. "You promised," Merle says. Baker thinks to himself, "You know what she promised him, don't you?" Cass looks at Seb and Baker and tells him, "Go get seats. I'll be right there." Baker tries to say something in protest, but she says, "I'll be fine." Seb and Baker go in alone and take their seats. About 10 minutes later, Cass comes in and joins them. She looks right at Baker, and before he can ask what that was, she says, "Don't worry about that. I just had to pay my debt." "Always pay your debts, Baker," she says with a wink. They sit through the movie and all agree it kinda sucked. "Not enough boobs," Seb says. Cass says, "You like boobs, Seb? Wanna see mine?" His eyes quickly focus on her chest, but he quickly looks away and says, "Yeah, right." But sure enough, she quickly unzips her jacket and flashes them both. Baker sees it too, but before they can say anything else, she's already gone and skipping up the movie theater alley. They all share a cigarette, and before Baker can really recover from what happened, she says, "Alright, she's going home." She walks away, and Baker turns to Seb and asks, "You want to follow her?" Seb says, "Why? You just want to watch her changing through her window or something?" Baker says, "She's our friend. I have more respect for her than that." But he is kind of curious where she lives. "She's been to both of our houses. Aren't you curious where she lives?" Seb says, "No, not really. But good luck." Let me know if you see some skin. Call me when you get home. Baker quickly follows Cass behind and hides behind trees and anything he can. At some point, she turns around and he's sure that she saw him, but she turns right back around. She gets towards a couple of houses and then does a spin again. Baker quickly ducks behind a car and closes his eyes. When he opens them, someone's standing over him. "What are you doing?" a man's voice says. He looks up and sees an older man. Baker quickly makes up a lie and says, "He got lost." The man says, "You need to be careful. This is a nice neighborhood, but there's a lot of weirdos out of dark." Baker tells the man his address, and the man looks it up on his phone and tells him how to get home. He walks home thinking about the pig guts and Cass. 66 days left. They all sit in the abandoned house, their new clubhouse. Dirt all over the carpets and broken glass from bottles all over. "You think anyone squats here?" Baker asks. "What, you scared of the bums?" Cass says. Baker says no. Actually, yes, after thinking about it. Seb says something about corny, and Cass asks, "What did he do now?" Baker says they don't know it was him, but on the locker room wall, graffiti was written that said, "Baker Gray sucks dog dick," but they don't know if it was him. Cass then goes into the other room and calls for Baker to come with her. Baker looks at Seb, hopes to see him to tell Baker to run, but he just follows Cass. As he leaves Seb, he thinks he sees a look of resentment in his eyes, or jealousy. As he walks towards the other room, he thinks about it. This is like a cult. Cass wouldn't let them leave even if they wanted to. He doesn't want to get on her bad side and end up tied to a tree with his dick in his hand like corny. But does he even really want to leave her? Call it love or whatever, but Baker doesn't seem to know what love is. But Cass is the first thing he thinks about in the morning and the last thing he thinks about before he goes to bed. Is that love? He sometimes even dreams about her where he was Myrtle in the movie theater. She takes him behind the movie theater and kisses him and then slits his throat with the butterfly knife, but then he wakes up. "What's wrong, new kid?" she says in the dream. He snaps out of it, then enters the room where Cass is. There's graffiti of unmentionable things and bubble letters all over. There's a window in this room and he can see the sun just start to fall in the school night sky. He has to leave soon. Cass closes the door and tells him, "Come here." He does, and he can feel a weird ghost vision of her in his mind saying, "Good boy, good boy." She points out the window and says, "Miss Clement lives right across the street there, you know. But that just means we'll have to be extra sneaky." "But you're good at being sneaky, right?" "I know that was you the other night following me. Don't play dumb." She pulls out the butterfly knife and every muscle freezes and all he can say is, "I'm sorry." She gets closer and there's a fire in her eyes, one from the depths of hell itself. He waits for her to slit his throat, but she doesn't. She says, "It's fine. But why'd you do it?" Baker stammers and says, "He just wanted to see where she lived. Maybe he'd get to know her better." She says, "Are you looking at my house?" He says it sounds stupid when she says it like that. Cass says that's because it is stupid. She then says, "Whatever, and look at the walls. What do you see?" Baker says, "Graffiti?" She pulls him closer so his head is on her boob. He feels warm and tingly. "What do you see beyond the art on the wall?" Baker laughs and says he wouldn't actually call it art. Cass says everything they do is art. Everything anyone does is art. The graffiti is the artist's blood. She takes out the butterfly knife and cuts her palm open and smears the blood all over her hand. She then places her crimson handprint on the wall near the graffiti, and then she invites Baker to do the same. "Come on, Bake. Become the art." He hesitates, and she says, "What, are you worrying? You're ready for this, Bake. So much more ready than Seb." Baker knows that if he doesn't do this, she'll call Seb in and he'll do it no problem. She comes over to him and sticks the middle of the butterfly knife in his palm. She says, "It hurts less when you don't worry." The warm trickle comes and she smears it all over his hand. She then puts his hand next to hers on the wall, and then grabs his hand with her bloody hand and they interlock fingers after. They are intertwined, their blood flowing between both of them. Baker thinks they're one now. Her blood in his body. She rushes through his body in that way. Her blood in his veins, in his arms, legs, brain, and other places. Feel that, Bake? The art that flows through me now flows through you. And all of a sudden they hear a faint footstep walking down the hall and a bored whistle. But Baker pays no mind to Seb in the hallway. He feels like he's in heaven. Or maybe the fiery pits of hell. 59 days left. Christmas Eve. Baker rolls out of bed and looks at his clock. 11:40 a.m. He knows he has to get up, though. He made plans for today. But life is good right now. Corny has left him alone, and he doesn't have to worry about moving anymore. And besides, tomorrow's Christmas. He goes downstairs after showering and sees his mom. Merry Christmas Eve, they say to each other. She asks if he has plans today, and he lies and says, yeah, he's going to the park to play football with some friends. She says he's never home anymore, which is a good thing, but she's surprised. Baker says before, he never bothered making friends because they moved around so much. His mom frowns and looks sad. Baker thinks that she knows it's her fault. I'm sorry, kiddo, she says. Baker thinks it looks like she's blinking away tears. She says make sure he comes home for dinner at least. She's making his favorite Christmas Eve tradition, seafood lasagna. Fucking gross, by the way. Baker says actually, he wants to be honest. He doesn't really like the seafood lasagna. He always puts up with it because his mom likes it. She laughs and says she only makes it because she thought he liked it. They both laugh about how for the past 10 years, she's made it for every Christmas Eve because she thought Baker liked it, and he didn't say anything because he thought she liked it. He sits down for breakfast, thinking he's going to be late, but he wants to spend some time with his mom this morning. She asks how's the cut on his hand doing. Baker lied and said it was from jumping a fence, and he said it's doing okay now. She says don't jump any fences going to the park today, okay? A vision of Cass in Baker's head says, there are fences all around us in this world, and we're gonna climb them all. Baker got to the abandoned house a bit later. You're late, Bake, she says as she tosses down a nudie mag. Seb curses his cell phone for bad service in the corner at the same time. Baker says it isn't that late. Besides, he was with his mom. Cass says, oh, I'm happy for you. She says it weirdly, and as if she sees that Baker's confused by how she said it, she continues, I am, really. They sit in a small circle and they take out their presents for each other, and Cass calls out, ooh, I can't wait, I love Christmas. Baker gives the first gift to Seb. Seb shakes it and opens it. Dude, you didn't have to do this. He pulls out a new PlayStation controller. Your X button was sticking on the other one. Seb looks sad and says, I feel like a dick for my present now. I thought we were doing small gifts. This must have cost you like $60. Seb hands Baker his gift and Baker opens it. It's a geode starter kit. Baker flashes the biggest smile he can muster and says he loves it. Really? Seb says he knows it sucks. Baker says no, clothes would have sucked. Baker asks, what did Seb get Cass? And Cass says, it's a secret, and winks at Seb. Isn't that right, Sebby? Baker clenches his jaw and thinks, Sebby? Cass then pulls out 2 boxes. These are you two's gifts, she says. He hopes it's not pig guts, or Corny's penis, but he stops himself. That's not nice to think Cass would do such things. He opens it, and it's a necklace. A heart-shaped necklace. Inside the heart is a picture of Cass, her bleach blonde hair over her eyes as she smiles. Both Seb and Baker look at each other and Cass notices and says, I know it's a little girly, but I thought you guys would like it. Seb says really fast, I love it. It's the most beautiful gift anyone has ever given me. Baker doesn't buy that for a second. Cass looks at him after saying she's happy that Seb said that. Yeah, it's really good. I'll wear it, Baker says. Damn right you will, she says, as they come in for a group hug. Damn right. Baker gets home later and his mom asks how the game was. He puts his necklace in his pocket because there's no way his mom would allow him to be that close to Cass. She doesn't even know about Cass. And quickly she notices the geode kit in his hands. Baker says, oh, Seb was at the game and he gave me a Christmas present. Oh, Seb, she says, like his name was something sour in her mouth. Baker says, you don't even know Seb, you've never met him. She says she knows, but Baker's gotten into fights, and he's changed since he met Seb. It worries her. He says if she met him, she might like him. She then says, well then invite him over for dinner sometime. Baker says, fine, and then they drop the conversation. Baker goes to his room to get ready for dinner, and he throws his coat on the bed, and something hits the bed with a hard thud. He picks it up and sees that Cass snuck him an extra gift in a little box in his pocket. On it was a note that said, Baker, here's something extra for you. I figured you'd like this more than a silly necklace. P.S. Don't tell Seb. I think he's getting jealous. Love, Cass. He read that word again. Love. He thinks to himself, he is in love. He is obsessed. That vision of her in her head saying, I am inside you. My art is inside you. Plays over and over. He opens the box and hopes once again it's not Corny's penis, but he opens it and it's the butterfly knife. the same one she threatened Corny with. His mom yells at him to come down for dinner. 49 days left. Mrs. Delgado stands in front of the class with Principal Walters. He urges her to continue, but there's a pressure in the air. As you all may have heard, Cornelius McCarthy has gone missing. There it was. There were rumors in school, but now it was confirmed. Corny had gone missing. Murmurs start up, and the principal says that they are all going to do an exercise because finding Cornelius McCarthy is the utmost importance. We are going to do this exercise, and I'm going to talk to each and every one of you independently and ask you what you all know, he says. The principal points at Baker first and says, he's up first. Baker looks around, and the principal says, that's right, you first. Baker swallows and follows the principal to his office. When he gets there, Baker thinks it smells like old books. The principal says he's going to come right out and say it. He doesn't think that Baker had anything to do with it. He knows that he and Cornelius got into fights, but he thinks that Baker is a good egg. But he has to check all possible avenues to find this boy and bring him home. Baker remembers some of his mom's murder shows. You mean like Persons of Interest? The principal says it's not that serious, but yeah. He asks straight up, do you know what happened to Cornelius, Baker? Do you know anyone who would want to hurt him? Baker says straight up, no. The principal says, okay. That's all I had to ask you. And he lets him go. As he walks away, Baker says he feels guilty, but he doesn't know why. After school, Baker walks home. He usually does this with Seb, but Seb was weirdly absent today. Baker figures he has the flu, and he walks home with the after-school euphoria. He expected the talk to go a lot worse with the principal, but it actually wasn't that bad. It was pretty quick. He thinks that Cass wasn't even brought up in that talk, but it doesn't matter. Cass wouldn't have done anything, right? No, she couldn't have. She made her point in the woods that day, and no one would say anything about that anyway. But part of him wonders. Cass overheard that conversation with Seb about the graffiti on the wall with his name in it. But no, Cass would never do something like that. Cornelius just ran away from home. Kids do that all the time. Hey you! Someone calls up from behind him as he walks. He turns around and sees 4 high school boys. He thinks about running, but just walks up to him. Yeah, I thought it was you. So where is she? The high schooler asks. Baker doesn't understand. She's always doing dumb shit. No one's seen her since she got into it with Mr. Wilson. She hasn't been in class either, the high schooler says again. Another high schooler says, is that chick fucked up or what, kid? Baker understands who they are talking about now. Cass. So he doesn't know what they're talking about. Why didn't Cass tell them about all this? Is that chick psycho or what? I heard she had an abortion a few years ago and hadn't been the same since, one of the other high schoolers say. And Baker says, abortion? The leader of the boys says, kid, do you even know who you're hanging out with? How old even are you? He asks. Baker replies, 14. They all laugh. 14? Man, she likes him young. You tapping that kid? You fucking her? He walks away, but they all hoot and holler and laugh and ask, where's he going? He wants to fight them, but he promised his mom. He thinks of her, his happy place. All the Christmas presents she gave him that she probably can't afford. He has to think of his mom. He walks away, and the vision of Cass in his mind says to him, I gave you that butterfly knife for a reason. Baker ignores the vision. He goes home and eats the ziti his mom left out for him.
So what, ziti now? Hey!
48 days left. Baker got to the house and looked around at its emptiness. There was also glass all over from Seb throwing bottles. He wondered what it would look like with the couch. On a couch, he could kiss Cass on it, or explore her with unfamiliar hands. Both of them are about to get here, but he wishes it was just Seb today. He wants to tell him about what those high schoolers said about Cass and discuss that. As he thinks this, he hears Cass and Seb coming in the room. Cass kicks the broken glass on the ground and scolds Seb. She says, this place isn't a dump, Seb. This is our second home now. Seb puts his metaphorical tail between his legs and says, okay. Seb says, she's right. He even is going to come here and sleep sometimes when spring rolls around. Cass squeals and says, ooh, a slumber party. Baker says that his mom probably won't let him. Cass says, come on, just say you're sleeping at Seb's house. Baker says, unfortunately, his mom doesn't really like Seb. He says, sorry, Seb. And Seb just absentmindedly says, yeah. Cass rubs Baker's leg and says, just make up a different friend then. He isn't sure if this rub was friendly or something more. Seb, drunk, all of a sudden says, when we die, you think we'll haunt places? Places like this? Cass asks, where did that come from? But she doesn't want to talk about this. Baker says, maybe it's like in the movies. The people who have unfinished business stay as ghosts. Others move on. Cass says that's bullshit. Then, you know what I think? I think we come into this world as worm food, and we leave as worm food. The boys laugh, and she continues. Come help me clean up Wormwood Estates now, huh? Seb and Baker both say that seems like a good name for this place. Wormwood Estate. 47 days left. Gerald Clement wakes up to the smell of coffee in his nostrils. He forgets his dream pretty fast, and he puts his hand on the other side of the bed. His wife Alyssa must have already left for work. He gets dressed in the same old outfit. Alyssa hates this outfit, but he likes the way he dresses. He likes himself. Maybe too much sometimes. He goes downstairs and gets the Keurig ready and wonders if Alyssa's still mad at him. He had an emotional affair with a woman at his job. But he thinks emotional affairs are not real affairs, right? He finds a note on the table. It must be from Alyssa. I'd like to try again. A. With a heart around the A. Alyssa must not be mad anymore. He wonders if trying for another kid is right at the moment, though. Why can't she just be happy? She has a good job at the school as a guidance counselor, and his job gives them freedom. Why do they have to ruin it with another kid? Isn't he enough for her? He was even there when her father died emotionally, but she isn't there for him in the bedroom. To him, sex is a big band-aid, and the fact that they do it just to reproduce bothers him. 3 affairs can attest to that. He looks at the note again and sees at the bottom he missed 3 words on it. I love you. A sentence they've said to each other plenty of times over 18 years, but for some reason, this hurts him. Bad. Every single bad deed Gerald has ever done comes rushing back to him. Sorry, he says, wondering why he has empathy all of a sudden. He then breaks down and cries. 46 days left. Baker tells Seb what those high schoolers said, and Seb looks down. Damn, man. An abortion? You think that's true? Seb asks him. Baker says he doesn't know what to think. He tells Seb not to tell Cass about this conversation. And Seb says he's not going to tell her about this shit. Is he crazy? They sit there in silence for a second. They are in a nice warm sun in gym class behind the bleachers like usual. The coach yells at 2 kids to run faster in front of them, but thankfully doesn't see Seb and Baker. Seb then takes a puff of his e-cigarette that Cass stole for him. Baker thinks that Seb's been smoking a lot lately. Baker then asks, what about Corny? What happened to him? Seb says he doesn't care. Fucker deserved it. Baker asks, do you think that Cass might have... Seb says, nah. Corny ran away or some shit. His parents were assholes from what I remember hearing, Seb says. Baker says he can't stop thinking about that day in the woods with Corny. Seb laughs and says, yeah, that was great, wasn't it? Baker thinks about how he has jumped the fence on the good person, bad person fence. But it feels nice almost sometimes. He takes Seb's e-cigarette and takes a puff. It even feels good in his lungs. 32 days left. The sun sets on Wormwood Estate, and inside the 3 were there like normal. Cass was looking at a nudie mag, and Seb was drinking a bit of vodka. He was really drunk. You gotta calm it down on the vodka, Sebby, Cass says as she shows the mag to Baker and asks his opinion on the pictures. Baker says, gross. Cass laughs. Gross? Baker says, yeah, he doesn't want to see naked dudes, even though there was also a woman in the picture. She then shows Seb, and Seb says, oh, I would stick my... But then he falls down from the drunkenness. Cass says, Sebby, honey, please calm it down with the booze. I'm not going to babysit tonight. That's not on my agenda. Seb says, speaking of that, what is the agenda? He laughs and then chucks a bottle at the wall. He looks like a werewolf about to transform. That's how drunk he is. Dude, chill, Baker yells. You chill, Baker! Baker, shitmaker. He laughs drunkenly. Seb stumbles around looking for something else to destroy. Cass says, Seb, darling, please calm down. We don't want the cops called. Cass then gets up and says, they should take this house for their own. Truly their own. They would need to clean it up, though. Seb says, hell yeah, he'd do that. Baker wants to object, but he knows when Cass gets like this, it's no use. Cass just looks at him and says, come on, Bake. Just us. Baker thinks that's weird. It's almost as if she means just the 2 of them. He wants to feel her so bad, and she interrupts his thoughts and asks, what are you thinking about? Baker says, nothing, and then he puts a hand on her shoulder. Hey! Get your hands off my girl, Seb yells. Baker asks, what's he talking about? But Cass says, he's drunk, he doesn't know what he's saying. Seb stumbles over his words, but says, I know what I'm saying. Tell her, Baker. Tell her what you told me, what those high schoolers said. That she's a psycho bitch. Cass looks at Baker, and Baker says, it's nothing. He's drunk. Seb says, no, you're confused, Baker. Tell her what those high schoolers said. About the abortion. Baker felt like a shard of glass entered his heart. What the fuck? Cass says. She clenches her teeth so hard she feels like she might break her jaw. I want names. I want the names and everything they fucking said about me. Baker says he doesn't know. He didn't ask their names. He wouldn't lie to her. She says, yeah, I guess you wouldn't. But then, listen up, fuckers. If either of you want to keep being my friend or have anything to do with me, tell no one about this. A tear rolls down her cheek and she says, I'm going home. 31 days left. Mrs. Clement walks down the hallways with all the teachers congratulating her. Baker wonders why, but then he sees they're all touching her belly. She's preggo, Seb says as he burps. He then says he wants to apologize for the other night. It wasn't right of him to do that. Baker says he knows, but just take it easy with the drinking. Mrs. Clement walks up to Baker and says, Mr. Gray, can I see you in my office real quick? She then walks away. Ooh, you're in trouble, Seb says. Baker says, shut up. Seb then says, Baker, can you text Cass for me? I want to make sure she's okay. She's not responding to me. Baker agrees, and then we see the text conversation. In the conversation, Cass says she's okay, but then she offers to meet Baker at Wormwood Estate later at 8. Just the two of them. It has to do with their special relationship. Baker texts, what do you mean by that? But she just says, she sees the way he stares at her. Just meet her at 8. His chest feels like it's about to explode when he reads that, but he's knocked out of his fantasies by Mrs. Clement asking what's he thinking about in her office. He asks, what did you call me here for? And then she pulls out 2 report cards. She shows him the first one with mostly A's and a few B's. He asks, what's the big deal with that? And then she shows him his current report card. All C's, except for 2 D's. Baker understands now. Mrs. Clement says she's seen this dozens of times before. A good kid with good grades falls in with the wrong crowd and loses everything. She says she knows Baker's smarter than this. She says she knows it must be hard for him because of all the moving. Baker tries to please the woman and says, I get it. I'll hang out with my friends less and study more. Mrs. Clement says, that's good. And your English teacher has offered you extra credit to do a book report on Lord of the Flies, which is a book I want to eventually do an extreme book club on, by the way. Baker says, okay, he'll do the report, and they conclude their meeting. Baker gets home and is immediately grounded. Baker tells his mom the grades are not that big of a deal, but she says it's a huge deal. He's never even had a C before this year. Now he has 2 D's. She says, once again, you're grounded. Baker thinks about the meeting he's supposed to have with Cass tonight. He can't go to it if he's grounded. She tells him to go upstairs and put something nice on. A man named Joseph is coming over. Hey, that's my name. Baker says, why? So you can impress him? His mom asks, what has gotten into you? He walks away and says, this is bullshit, under his breath. She asks, what did you just say? Her flash of anger makes him happy for some reason. He turns around and says, I said this is bullshit. Making me dress up for your new boyfriend and grounding me. She yells at him that he's eating in his room tonight. You're not coming out. He sneers and lifts his fist as if he's going to punch the wall, but he doesn't. He goes in his room and texts Cass that he can't come over tonight. His mom's being a bitch. She just replies, too bad. Too damn bad. 30 days left. Baker listens from the top of the stairs. Joseph is over again tonight, and his mom is listening to his story about gas station sushi or something. She laughs after the story's over, and Baker wonders what's wrong with his mom. Why is she like this? He has decided to sneak out tonight. He's going to meet with Cass at Wormwood Estate. He has to. He sneaks out his window and looks at his phone and texts Cass, are you there? And she says she's already there. He remembers a couple dreams he's had recently, wondering if tonight will be like those. One of which where they meet in the bathroom and the wall is filled with graffiti, explicit things about Cass. They meet and hug and kiss. Another dream is where she sits outside his window on a tree and watches him sleep like a predator with glowing blue eyes. Baker climbs into the window of Wormwood Estate and calls out for Cass. She calls back that she's in the room where they made the art earlier, her voice quiet and velvety. He walks in and sees her on the bed, her legs exposed and she's in a sundress. He's never seen her in a dress before. He says, hey Bake, I hope you like the outfit. He thinks, oh, he does. The dress is thin, so much that he can see through a lot of it. I'm surprised you made it tonight. I thought because you were grounded you wouldn't come. Baker says he wouldn't miss this. She says she likes that from him. She likes that he snuck out. It's very on edge. Baker thinks this is nothing. Stealing $20 from his mom the other week was. This whole double life thing is more risky than sneaking out. However, everyone in the world has stared love in the face for the first time, so this is just a rite of passage for him. She beckons him closer and he goes to her. She says, I need to talk. She heard that he talked to Mrs. Clement recently. She has to know what they talked about. Baker says, just about grades. She then lunges and chokes him seductively. She says, you didn't talk about me at all? Baker says, no, loving every second of this. She says, Baker, let me tell you a story about this bitch named Mrs. Clement. Once upon a time, there was a 14-year-old girl. She was discovering herself and discovering art for the first time, something Mrs. Clement could never do. This 14-year-old girl was so full of art that she created life itself. And the bitch ruined it. Baker asks, what did she do? And then in the candlelight, Cass sits there and looks so serious. She told the girl's father and ruined the art. All because she couldn't make art herself. Doesn't matter if this is true or false. When a lie is believed by everyone, it becomes the truth. Baker has no idea what she's talking about. Cass says she needs him to come over here. She guides his hand up her inner thigh and he feels like there's a tire on her upper leg. Scars. Self-harm scars. Baker asks if Mrs. Clement made her do that. Cass says, yes. When all was said and done, she needed to feel something. She needed to make art again, just not to bleed out. Baker asks, do you still do that? Cut? She says, no. Now she cuts others. The words don't register with Baker. She then asks if Baker will help her get back at Mrs. Clement. She says Seb already said he would. Baker wonders if Seb was here doing this exact same thing, and if she let him touch her too. Baker feels up further into her pelvis, and she nibbles on his earlobe. Yeah, I'll help you. He wonders what he just agreed to, but he knows it's too late to back out now. 21 days left. Baker and his mother walk out of the school, and Mrs. Gray says that Baker's been a real asshole lately. Baker says this isn't a big deal, and his mother says it is a big deal. His teachers are concerned. His guidance counselor, too. Doesn't he care? Baker thinks, fuck the guidance counselor, that bitch. She goes into a whole speech about how it's been hard for her, being a single parent, providing the best she can. She asks if this is his way of getting back at her, for moving so much. He turns his back to her in the car and faces the woods. She then looks at him and questions, this isn't you. Are you doing drugs? Pot? Pills? Baker says, no, he's not doing any of that. He says, he better get his grades up, or he will never leave this house again. Baker wants to scream out, I'm in love! Don't you care about what I'm going through? But he holds his tongue. She wouldn't understand about Cass. As they drive, all of a sudden out of nowhere, Baker sees Cass get into a Porsche down the street. She kisses the driver, but he can't see who it is. Mom, follow that car. She says no, and asks why. Baker says he thinks he saw a friend who is in an abusive relationship. He lies. He promises that he will study every night, do the trash forever if she follows that car. She says, okay, but they should call the police if it's really that bad. Baker says no, he just needs to check. They follow the car into a really nice neighborhood. Houses that Baker thought that he could never live in. They follow and his mom says that if he sees this man hit the girl, he's calling the police. They follow really close behind and see Cass get out of the car with an older man. She kisses the cheek of him and says, thanks for the ride, Daddy. She skips to the front door as they talk about going to a nice restaurant for dinner. Baker is stunned. That isn't Cass. Not the way he knows her. What's going on? She's dark and rebellious, not a daddy's girl or a rich kid. Baker's mom notices his confusion and asks, what's going on? Baker says, it's not who I thought it was. Sorry, Mom. He wasn't lying. That wasn't the Cass he knows. 11 days left. This chapter is a little short, but it involves Cass, Baker, and Seb picking out masks. Seb picks out a camouflage bandana. He says he likes it. It reminds him of Call of Duty. Cass says, good one, Sebby. She then puts hers on in the store, a pink bandana, and puts her finger guns up and points them at the boys. Give me all your gold, you son of bitches! She screams out. A worker comes over and asks, is everything okay over here? And Cass, with her endless charisma, says, it's okay, honey, we're just fine. The worker, who Baker notices is a woman anyway, just walks away with a frown. Nosy bitch, Cass whispers as after she leaves. Baker notices that she's been really moody lately. Baker pipes up and says, Hey, what are we gonna do in Mrs. Clement's house? It's just gonna be like a harmless fun, right? Like a harmless prank? Cass reassures, of course, it's just gonna be some pranks. Sub agrees and says it'll be fine, just like a game, but in real life. Cass says they need to pick out a mask for Baker. She suggests a blue one. She says it matches the sadness that is in Baker. Baker wonders what she means, but she says she can tell. There's a sadness in Baker's soul. Underneath it all, she says she knows. Baker Gray has layers. Baker says blue reminds him of freedom of the blue sky, not sadness. Cass says, get the blue one, Bake. The color is you. It's so you. He gets it on her suggestion, but he knows that no color will ever define him. 6 days left. Baker? His mom calls him from the living room. Baker wonders what he did now. He's been good all week. He even turned in the book report. He walked into the living room to hear what she has to say, and Joseph is sitting with her. She asks if he wants to sit down, and he says, not really. Just tell him what he did. His mother says he didn't do anything. She stammers for a second and then blurts out, we're pregnant. You're going to have a little brother or sister. Baker can't believe what he just heard. You're joking, right? He asks. But his mom assures him, aren't you happy? Baker says, no, I'm not happy. I'm at the babysit after he leaves you within a year. He points to Joseph. He wants to punch something, anything. He wants to be at the Wormwood estate, anywhere but here. Joseph says that she should tell him the other thing too. But she says now isn't a good time, as a single tear falls from her face. Tell me what? I want to know, he yells, his stomach full of panic. My job offered me another raise. California. We're all moving to California. As a family, she says. Joseph seems to delight in this, but the room spins for Baker. That promise she made was empty. He thought Long Lake, Georgia would be his forever home. I lied to you, Baker. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, but I promise this will be the last time. I swear my life on it, she says. Bullshit! Baker yells. Joseph tells him to calm down. Baker yells, you shut up! You're not my father! It feels cliche, but right to say in the moment. His mother says that she had every intention on keeping that promise, but she fell in love. She knows that someday Baker will fall in love too and understand why she had to do this. The word echoes in his head. Love. How love changes people. Fuck you both, he says. Joseph tells him to calm down and he can't speak to his mother that way, but he goes to his room. He jumps on his bed and puts his head in the pillow. Love? He knows that love changes people, but does it do this? Make you lie? Make you neglect? He hates this. He texts Cass, how soon can we move into Wormwood estate? My mom's being a bitch. Cass texts back, why? I'm coming over. Not long after, Joseph comes up and opens the door. He tells Baker that he and his mom ordered pizza. Baker says he doesn't want any. Joseph comes in and puts a plate down on his dresser and speaks frankly to Baker. He says he knows this is hard, but he wants Baker to know that he's on his team. Baker says he doesn't care. Joseph says let him guess. Baker thinks that he isn't his mom's first boyfriend and he won't be the last, right? Well, Joseph says he really loves his mom. Baker retorts that that doesn't make him his dad, and Joseph says no, but maybe someday he'll be a stepdad. Joseph says that he was once in Baker's shoes. He was an army boy and he always moved around. He really is on Baker's team, he says. Baker says, if you're on my team, make mom stay. Joseph says he can't do that. But the house on Wormwood Estate he always breaks into with his friends? He won't tell his mom about that. Baker looks up. How do you know about that? Joseph says, well, he did a job on that sphere a couple days ago and he saw them break in. Joseph says that Baker isn't the first person to have a secret clubhouse. He won't say anything. Baker thinks that he really doesn't have a reason to hate Joseph. He's just skeptical. He's seen his mom hurt too many times. Joseph says to give his mom a break, even if it feels like she doesn't deserve it, because she truly loves Baker a hell of a lot more than she loves Joseph. And Joseph says that's how it should be. He then leaves. Baker thinks he's not mad about having to move again, or even make new friends. He's mad because he's in love. This is about love. Baker waits for Cass by his window. He figures that he should be the one climbing in her window, not the other way around. All of a sudden, he sees her down the street, her silhouette against the light of the streetlight. He quickly hides all of the childish stuff in his room, including his Snoopy clock, and gets ready. Tonight, he's resolved he's gonna kiss her. She climbs his tree to get to his window, and then she whispers, "Let me in," like a vampire needing an invitation. He doesn't hear her, though. He's lost in her graceful movements of her arms and legs like a black widow about to devour its lover. She comes in and whispers, "It's good to see you." She sits down on his bed with him. This is all he cares about right now. Cass is his best friend and his first love. The only person who ever's understood him, other than Seb. She asks, "What's your mom being a bitch about?" Baker says, "My mom's pregnant." She says, "It's beautiful." She lies down and stares at the ceiling with the glow-in-the-dark stars his mom put on. She asks, "Do you ever make a wish on those stars?" He says, "Yeah, to stay here, to have friends." But he doesn't say that he wishes for her, although he does. She asks, "What are you hiding from me?" Being pregnant isn't her being a bitch. She asks if this is about him worrying about what they're going to do to Mrs. Clement in a week, because it's just going to be a small prank. Baker says no, it's not that. He's moving to California. That's why he wants to move into Wormwood Estate as soon as possible. She hugs him and says, "I'm so sorry, Bake. I'm going to miss you." He asks, "What can he do?" She says, "We could kill him. Your parents slit their throats while they sleep." Baker stays still, and she laughs. "I'm just kidding, Bake." Baker says he knows. Does he? Bake, have you ever kissed a girl before? Like, on the lips? Baker says no, his heart beating out of his chest. She says, "Good. Close your eyes. You've earned this." She kisses him, and he describes how everything else goes away. No pregnancy exists, no California exists, nothing but this moment. It lasts only seconds, but it feels like an hour, although somehow still too short. She says, "Not bad for your first time." She then asks, "Does your room have a lock?" Baker says, "He wishes." And she says, "Well, you better be quiet then," as she moves towards his lower half and unbuckles his pants. Okay, instead of an amount of days left now, the chapter starts with just one word. Today. Seb, Baker, and Cass are outside Mrs. Clement's house, all ready with their masks on. Cass instructs Seb how to break the window so they can get in. Seb, filled with alcohol, takes some time as he attempts to break it over and over again. Baker says he's worried about someone seeing them, but Cass caresses his face and the fear goes away. As she does, Seb manages to break through the window and get inside. They get in and Cass takes off her backpack. She takes out 3 more pig fetuses. Cass explains that what they're going to do is they're each going to hide one of the fetuses. When the Clements eventually find one, they will think the horrible smell will go away, but they won't expect the other 2 after that. The house will smell for months. Cass gives them each a fetus and instructs Seb to go downstairs to hide his, and Baker will take the main floor and she will go upstairs. Baker looks down and is very nervous. Cass asks, "Are you okay?" And Baker says they should leave. They shouldn't be here. This is absolutely not okay. But after looking at Cass, all he can say is, "I'm fine." He knows he shouldn't be here, though. This woman has been nothing but helpful to him, right? No, he thinks. This is the woman that ruined your girlfriend's life. He thinks to himself that she deserves this. Cass says, "Good, let's get going," and gives his crotch a squeeze. As she goes upstairs, all Baker can think about is that one story he read that one time, The Telltale Heart, with the heart under the floorboards. All of a sudden, a crash rings out. He hears Seb yelling from the basement, saying, "Shit!" Baker runs down and sees Seb near a liquor cabinet with a bunch of broken glass all over. Baker asks, "What's he doing?" But Seb says it was an accident. He was just stealing some vodka for the road. He asks if Baker wants a swig. Baker thinks maybe he could use it. Might calm his nerves. He takes the bottle and chugs 4 big gulps. "Damn, dude, I'll be surprised if you can walk home after that," Seb says. Baker's insides burn. He did that because he once saw one of his mom's exes do that, but that was not good. He hopes Seb is wrong here. He and Seb pull out a mini fridge and hide one of the fetuses behind it, and they head back upstairs. As they do, Baker gets a glimpse of himself in the mirror downstairs. He sees a man looking back, not the sweet boy his mom sees. "Fucker," he thinks. "You're a man now." Seb interrupts his thoughts as he walks to the stairs and says, "Did you have sex with Cass?" Baker is surprised. He says, "No, not really exactly." Seb says he was just wondering. Baker then asks Seb the same question, and Seb says, "Oh, he doesn't kiss and tell." This thought sickens Baker. Cass on Seb and doing stuff to him. But that can't be true. There's no connection there, he thinks. Seb says that Baker is his best friend, and he doesn't want to fight with him anymore. They should just keep going. Baker says Seb is his best friend too, but in his head, he really doesn't think that. There was a time when he thought Seb was his best friend, and it was the best friend he could ever get, but he doesn't think that anymore. That was before Cass, before the kissing, before the drinking and everything else. Seb says, after this, tomorrow, we're going to do some gaming. I promise. Baker agrees, but thinks there's no way he's going to do that with his ass. Seb takes a swig, and Baker thinks that's bad. Sober Seb isn't great, but drunk Seb was his worst enemy. He says, I'll meet you back upstairs later. Seb says he's just going to stay down here with the alcohol. Baker goes upstairs and leaves Seb behind. Baker finds Cass in the kitchen, grabbing a pie from the fridge and putting it down near a gun that wasn't there before. She sticks her finger in it and says, I can make a better pie than that. Baker asks, you brought a gun? Cass says, no, she found it upstairs. She took it because she thought the two boys would think it was cool. Besides, she shot a gun before with her dad in the woods when she was younger. She trails off, but then just says, calm down, Baker. He tells her to put it back, and she gives a fake salute and says, yes, sir. And then she says, but be more demanding when you tell me to put it back. Act like you want to hurt me if I don't do it. He says, whatever, he'll put it back. She holds it away and says, make me. He walks away and says, stop fucking around and give me the fucking gun, Cass. She says, that's more like it, and starts making out with him right there. Seb walks up the stairs, and right before he sees them, they pull away from each other, and then Cass goes upstairs again. Seb asks where's she going, and Baker makes up a lie real quick and says she couldn't find a spot yet. Seb says, oh, okay. And as he does, headlights breach the window, pulling into the driveway. Oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, Seb says. Baker says, I thought they were on vacation, and Seb says, that's what Cass said. Baker yells out for Cass, but Seb says they need to leave now. Baker says he isn't leaving without her. The keys rattle in the doorway and they both hide. Baker almost doesn't care though due to the alcohol. He's moving anyway, who gives a shit if he gets caught? But what he really wants is Seb to chicken out so he can save Cass and she can see what a bitch Seb is and then be only Baker's. The silence is deafening. Baker figures Cass must have already figured out the Clements are home. Maybe she already left through an open window upstairs. It's dead silence, and he wonders if they already saw him. I want popcorn and an ice cream sandwich, Mrs. Clement says. Baker looks at Seb, who is still there just as silent as him. Seb grabs a cutting board on the counter and pulls it back like a baseball bat. Gerald, Mrs. Clement's husband, starts to round the corner. Baker quickly shakes his head no, but Seb doesn't listen. Baker wants to yell out and warn Gerald, but before he can even try, a meaty whack of flesh and bone hitting the cutting board as Gerald falls to the floor, knocked out or worse. Baker thinks this isn't the start of summer. It's the start of something far worse. Gerald! Mrs. Clement yells out and runs towards the kitchen. Baker runs and checks Gerald's pulse before Alyssa Clement gets there. He's done this before. Mrs. Clement walks in and screams and covers her mouth like the Scream painting. Just then, Cass comes downstairs in Alyssa Clement's clothes for some reason. Why did you do that? Baker yells at Seb. Because it was the right thing to do, Cass says. But it doesn't sound like the Cass he knows anymore. Baker calls out, call 911! But he remembers that Cass told them to keep their cell phones at home because they had to be as silent as possible. No one's calling anyone. He'll be fine, Cass says as she points the gun at Mrs. Clement. Baker yells that they need to go. Cass says, go where? We are home. This is Wormwood, Bake. A hint of recognition flashes in Mrs. Clement's eyes. Bake? Baker Gray? Shit. Baker takes his mask down and so does Cass. Seb does the same and Mrs. Clement looks at them all. You're supposed to guide the kids, not talk shit about them behind their backs, Mrs. Clement, Cass calls out. Mrs. Clement says, I tried with you, I really did. Baker, in the confusion and tension, screams out, this was supposed to be a prank, Mrs. Clement. None of this was supposed to happen. Seb smacks Baker softly in the back of the head and Mrs. Clement pleads with Baker. Baker, please. But she gets cut off. Baker, is this what you really want? Decide with this dumb bitch who ruined my life? As well as go back to your shitty mom and her shitty boyfriend and move across the shitty country? Baker wants to say yes, but he figures that the only way to get out of this is if he agrees. No, I want to be with you. Cass smiles. That's my Bake. Then and only then does he see Cass for what she really is. A woman with many masks. The girl next door, the concerned friend, the artist that paints with blood, the potential killer who threatened to cut off a kid's manhood in the woods. But now he sees what's behind the mask. What she really is. An angel. Fallen. A worm in the wood. Every kiss he ever got from her now feels like a lie. Cass tells Seb to flip Gerald on his side so he doesn't suffocate. But Baker says, I'm done. I can't play along with this anymore. Come on, kid, stop being a pussy, Cass says to him. And just like that, he's back to being kid, Baker thinks. Baker says, this isn't what we came here for. Cass says maybe not him, but this is exactly what she came here for. Baker now knows that he is a prisoner with the Clements now. He is no longer in Cass and Seb's side. Maybe Seb and her should be together. He doesn't think Seb is capable of doing the right thing any more than Cass is. And now, Baker's not there to tame the succubus. He thinks that maybe he should make a run for it, but he genuinely isn't sure if Cass would shoot him or not. Cass tells Seb to flip Gerald on his side, again, and then she tells him to take his shoelaces and tie his arms and legs together with them. Baker says, "Seriously, Cass?" She says, "Yeah, seriously." Mrs. Clement says they can take anything they want, just leave. Cass says she might retract those words soon. She tells Seb to tie Mrs. Clement up too after he's done with Gerald, and then Gerald begins to wake and stir. He lets out a strange rattling noise that Baker thinks sounds like a death rattle. "Should I hit him again?" Seb asks. But Baker says, "Hit him again and I'll beat the shit out of you." Seb says he'd like to see Baker try, but Cass tells them both to calm down. Gerald regains consciousness miraculously and looks up. "Cass?" he asks. "Hi, Jer." All parties wonder what Cass and Gerald are talking about. Mrs. Clement asks first, "Gerald? What is she talking about?" Cass looks at Gerald and says, "Go ahead, Jerry. Tell her." I'm sure she suspected all along. She hops on the counter and points the gun at Gerald. Baker now wonders, why are they really here at the Clements' house? Cass looks at Mrs. Clement and says, "Alyssa, you might want to relax, because you're not going to like what you're about to hear. And I don't want to hear your bitching." She ties the mask in her mouth like a gag. Baker tells Cass to say her piece so they can all go. Cass says, "Oh, it's not that easy, Bake. Besides, Jerry isn't even going to fess up." But before she can even finish that sentence, Gerald pipes up, "I slept with Cass. I'm so sorry. I'm so fucking sorry, Alyssa, baby. That lying bitch manipulated me. Manipulated us. Remember? It was right after your first miscarriage," he pleads to his wife. Cass says, "Wow, you're gonna call it sleeping with me? Okay. If you want to be stingy with the details, let me tell you what really happened, Alyssa. When I was 14, Gerald gave me a ride home from cheerleading practice. Just 14. Baker has a hard time imagining Cass as a cheerleader, but he thinks this must have been what turned her from a normal daddy's girl into whatever she is now. Cass continues, "Don't worry, he didn't sexually assault me. It was more like grooming. I think that's the right term. It was just one ride at first, but then he would wait for me every day after practice for a ride." Gerald says, "It wasn't grooming, it just happened." Cass says, "Then came the gifts, then being a shoulder to cry on. He did your job, Alyssa, and he did it better than you ever did." Gerald says, "It wasn't grooming, it was just..." But then Seb screams, "Stick him, Cass! Stick that pig!" As if unsure of herself, Cass quickly pulls out a knife and stabs at Gerald's side, but the wound is shallow, as it was an unsure strike. "What the fuck?" he cries out as a trickle of blood comes through his shirt. "I told you to shut up, pig!" she yells. She then turns back to Alyssa and says, "So yes, it started with grooming, then a motel room, then a full-blown thing. You might wonder how many times he did that, but I kept tally." She holds up her skirt, showing the scars around her thighs. Each one was another time. He was the artist, and I was the canvas. Alyssa sobs, but Cass just continued. "He painted all over me. Probably why he kept coming back to me. Sounds like you had too many taboos, Alyssa." She continues that after that, she became pregnant. Gerald told her to keep it and nurse it and be a good mother to it. Cass then confided that into Mrs. Clement, and then she talked, gossiped, and then Cass became an outcast for it. Only later did Cass figure out that she was Gerald's wife as well. A miscarriage soon followed due to the stress. Then that bitch guidance counselor went around telling everyone that Cass herself killed the baby. Does that sound familiar, Mrs. Clement? Gerald screams out, "I'm glad you lost the baby! You would have been a horrible mother, you psycho bitch!" Seb stabs him in the leg and he screams. Cass bends down and says, "I would have been a great mother." Cass tells Seb to split open the pig fetus and bring it to her. She then force feeds Gerald the small, gross formaldehyde, slick, tiny fetus. Gerald gags and vomits in his own throat, and Cass and Seb continue force feeding him baby pig fetuses. Baker quickly grabs the knife and silently cuts Alyssa out of her binds. He tells her to keep quiet and wait for an opportunity. He then makes his way back towards the counter. "You are what you eat, you fucking pig," Cass yells. Baker doesn't know what to do. He feels like a fly on the wall. Cass?" "He's no longer breathing," Seb calls out. Baker looks over and he's vomited and it looks like he choked on it or succumbed to his wounds or both. "Fuck!" Cass calls out and starts doing CPR on him. Please breathe. Please breathe, honey." The word honey to Baker spoke volumes about their affair. Cass was a girl who was groomed and stung by love without the emotional maturity, or mental maturity, or maturity in general, to understand what happened. Baker looks at Alyssa, and she is completely stone-faced. Whether she's waiting for an opportunity to escape, or is paralyzed by the situation, is anyone's guess. Baker says, "They need to call 911. If Gerald dies, then we're all murderers." Seb says, "It was an accident." Baker pulls the knife and says, "Call 911. Seb looks around confused at how Baker got the knife, but then he takes another one from the block in the kitchen. "You're not calling anyone, you fuck!" Joseph drives home from his shift at the office. He's tired and wants to go home. But as he drives and drinks his blueberry coffee, he gets a call from Lily Gray. He answers and she sounds upset. He asks, "What's wrong?" And she says, "Baker's late tonight. 2 hours late. This isn't like him. I have a really bad feeling about this. He hasn't answered any calls or texts." Joseph offers to look for him, and Lily agrees and says she'd really appreciate that. Just look all around for him. Joseph hangs up and wonders if he should break the trust that he and Baker have. Despite him not knowing Baker long, he does want to be the boy's family, and it would break his trust to go to Wormwood and look for him. However, he figures it's better safe than sorry, as he turns onto Wormwood Circle. The 4 remaining souls inside of 8 Wormwood Circle sit there stunned. "Guys, we need to let Alyssa go. This was an accident, and we gotta stop this before it gets any worse." Cass says, "Baker, this shit just went next level," as she kisses the corpse of Gerald. Seb says, "It's okay. We know where to hide the body. It'll be fine." Alyssa sobs at this. Baker thinks to say something, but stops halfway. "You got something to say?" Seb walks up to Baker with the knife drawn. Baker says that they need to stop all of this. Turn themselves in before it gets any worse. This was an accident. He'll tell the cops that, and it will be okay for all 3 of them. Though he thinks in his head that there's no way he's going to tell the cops that this was all his fault. This was all Cass and Seb. "Why don't you show a little respect for Cass, huh? She helped you more than you could ever know," Seb yells at him. Baker tilts his head to the side and says, "Huh?" Cass tells Seb to shut up, but he continues. "She took care of your little problem. The kids at school should fucking worship her for what she did." Baker puts the pieces together. "Corny? Are you talking about Corny? Did you fucking kill him?" Cass tells Seb that was fucking stupid. He shouldn't have said that, let alone here. Baker should have never found this out. He can't handle stuff like that. Seb then stares holes through Baker. He has the right to know for the shitstorm you saved him from. Outside, Joseph parks on Wormwood Circle. He knows what kind of trouble kids can get up to. It's unlikely, but kids can do horrible things just like adults. He goes and looks in the abandoned house and finds nothing. All of a sudden, bang! A gunshot. Joseph turns around and turns towards the noise and looks where it came from. It was close by, in the cul-de-sac even. Then another bang! It was as if all noise stopped after it. Joseph quickly called the police and said he heard a gunshot on Wormwood Avenue. They go through the normal 911 stuff and tell him to stay in the line and stay where he is, but he immediately hangs up. He heads towards the house he heard the gunshots coming from. A few minutes earlier in that house, Cass tells Baker to take Gerald with her and take him to Wormwood Estate. Seb says that's a good idea. They'll hide up the body under the porch again. Again, Baker thinks. That night that he and Cass made art there was a rotting body just beneath them. "Come on, Baker, I'm not fucking around," Cass says, but Baker stays planted. "No, I'm not going to be a part of this any longer. We're going to let Mrs. Clement go and we're going to face the consequences of this." Seb pulls the knife out, a silent threat. Cass raises the gun to Baker and says, "Babe, don't make me hurt you." Baker tells her not to call him that. Cass, shocked, says, "You don't want me?" Seb chimes in and says, "Fuck him! He doesn't deserve you!" All of a sudden, a vase explodes next to Cass's head. Mrs. Clement saw the opportunity and threw it. Cass shoots and misses in the confusion right in between Baker and Miss Clement, and then drops the gun in panic. Baker notices and runs towards the gun and tries to grab it, but as he does, an extreme pain in his shoulder ripples through his body. He's been stabbed by Seb and tackled to the floor. "I told you!" Seb says, but as they all look up, Mrs. Clement now holds the gun. Cass notices and says, "What are you gonna do now, Alyssa? Kill your students? Just put the gun down." Baker just wants to be home in bed. He can't take this. He just wants to smell his mom's cooking, but there's a searing pain in his shoulder, like a white-hot light bulb has been put into it. "Mrs. Clement, just put the gun down and we'll all go to the hospital. Everything's gonna be okay," Cass says in that sweet voice that Baker now knows to be a front. "Are you insane? You just killed my husband, the father of my child." Cass then asks, "Why aren't you over by him then?" making sure he's really dead, seeing if there's not anything you can do. Mrs. Clement hesitates and looks over at Gerald. Cass scooches closer. Don't come any closer, Cass, Mrs. Clement yells at her. She gets closer again. I'm warning you! Closer. I will pull this trigger, I mean it! Cass says, no you won't. What if I'm pregnant again and haven't told you? Closer again. Then you and that baby have to step back and not come any closer. Cass says, okay, you called my bluff. And then she lunges for the gun and they struggle back and forth, only stopping when a gunshot rings out. And then Cass falls to the floor. Joseph prepares himself as he stands in front of the front door. He thinks that this very well could be nothing to do with Baker, and this could be a violent dispute between husband and wife. He's fully prepared to walk in there and get shot by a drunk husband if it means saving Baker, even if there's a slight chance that this is him in trouble. He barges in and takes him a second to figure out what's going on, who's in the wrong and what's happening. There's a lot of blood. More than he could have ever thought. First, he sees Baker leaning on the far wall, bloody but seemingly conscious. However, the other boy has a steak knife and is looming over him. Joseph doesn't waste any time and rushes the 14-year-old boy. He's much smaller than Joseph, and he kicks Seb in the leg, and with Joseph's larger size, the leg buckles and nearly breaks in half from the kick, the steak knife falling from his hands. He then looks on the floor and sees a girl, someone he doesn't know. He notices what she already figured out. There is a bullet hole in her stomach. She's fading fast. She drops the gun and takes her bloody hand and paints a flower on a nearby cabinet, and then she falls, limp. With her final breaths, right next to Gerald, she says, "You're a good kid, Big." And then she dies, like an angel who has lost her wings. 7 months later. Baker sits on a beach. The sand is softer on the west coast. He looks at his bare chest. He's getting a tan all over, except for the scar tissue on his shoulder. A permanent reminder. "Baker," he hears his mom call out. "It's the Washington Post. Again. They want your statement on Seb's sentence." Baker waves her away. He doesn't want to talk about this anymore. He just wants to forget the whole thing. He has to thank Alyssa Clement for that even being a possibility. Baker got 6 months probation, even though he was tried as an adult, unlike Seb, who got much longer. But he just wants to forget the 2 deaths that he saw. One of them, a girl he was once convinced he loved. Baker looks at the 2 older kids on the beach with him and sees them take a swig of alcohol. He remembers the burn of that well. Whether it led to Seb's downfall or just awoke something in him that was dying to come out, it doesn't matter. Baker has sworn off the stuff. "Heads up!" A volleyball smacks Baker on the head. He turns around and sees a cute girl and she apologizes to him. She looks at him again and says, "We're actually down a player. Do you want to play a game of volleyball?" Baker looks at his mom and Joseph and they nod and smile to him as if to say, "Go, play. She's cute." He walks over to the girl and she introduces herself as Ali. Baker says, "His name's Baker." She probably doesn't know, but he's the new kid. She says, "Oh, she knows who he is. He's Baker Gray." He sits in front of her in class and draws in his notebook. She has noticed him. Baker goes with her, and for once here in California, he feels at home. But that's it. That is Wormwood. I do like this book. Although I feel it could have been a bit longer, it still has a really good build-up and payoff. When the final day happens, it's very intense, and I was admittedly on the edge of my seat for most of it. But what does it all mean, Pugser? Well, let's get into that. But before we do, thank you for getting this far. I really appreciate you all, and I hope you enjoyed it so far. In the comments, let me know what you think the meaning of the book is. Done? Alright, let's get to it. There's a few easy themes that we can extrapolate here, so let's get the easy ones out of the way first. This is an obvious coming-of-age story. A really messed up one, but a coming-of-age story nonetheless. Baker grows up through the course of the book. He goes from a kid to a man pretty quickly throughout the book. But what else? There is a classic theme that we talk about on this channel known as the cycle of abuse, and that is absolutely present in this book. Cass originally was absolutely a huge victim. She was groomed, straight up. She didn't deserve what happened to her. Then on top of getting groomed, she became pregnant from her groomer. Then even worse than that, although it isn't extremely clear what happened, Mrs. Clement did gossip about her student losing a pregnancy, which is fucked up, but nowhere as near as fucked up as what her husband did without her knowing. Gerald is absolutely the biggest villain in this book. Then, as we all know from literally every single video on this channel, the cycle of abuse destroys every single person it touches. Cass is very much a victim of that cycle. She does something similar to Baker to what happened to her. Although it is severely less fucked up because she is still a kid too, she still does sort of in a way groom him. She dragged 2 kids into her business into murder by manipulating them. A smaller, less evident theme is that how everything that feels like love isn't always true love, especially to an inexperienced person. Both people may even think it's love when it's not. The idea of love can be muddied very easy. When things like power or control or age are involved with a relationship, love can all of a sudden feel like it never was love to begin with. Another one is how the desire to belong can be such a strong motivating factor to humans that it can easily be a factor to lose morality. The need to fit in is so strong that it can make you do horrible things. Peer pressure is an actual thing, and it is a bitch. To sort of build off that last theme, people can and will find any excuse they can to justify shitty actions. Cass uses the veil of art to justify her actions a lot of the time. Like we said a second ago, Baker uses the desire to belong and the desire to be loved as an excuse for his shitty actions too. Even when it doesn't feel like it, you may find yourself doing things that are morally reprehensible because you think you're justified in doing it. It's not like Cass knew what she was doing was wrong necessarily. She was completely blinded by her pain and everything else. It's understandable, but is still shitty. Finally, a small one would be that things can go from innocent fun and just a little bit of messing around to extremely bad real quickly, so just watch yourself on that. But that's about it. Thank you all for watching. For the next couple of weeks, we have 3 fun videos coming out. Next week will be a redo of the mouthwashing video, the week after that will be another extreme movie night, and then finally in 3 weeks will be a book called The Deep by Nick Cutter, which is the same author as The Troop, one of the better books we've covered, so stay tuned for all of that. If you want to be like these people on screen, you can head over to my Patreon and become a super supporter. It is not necessary, but appreciated. Thank you all for watching. I cannot express in words how much you all mean to me, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. I love you all.